From Christianity Today, you're listening to The Bulletin, a podcast about the people, events, and issues that are shaping our world. I'm Mike Cosper, and today I'm in Washington, D.C. for a conversation with Dan Partland and Rob Reiner. Dan is the director of a new film called God and Country, a documentary about Christian nationalism. And Rob Reiner is one of the film's producers.
Hey, Mike. Wonderful to meet you. Yeah.
But you probably know him from films he's directed like
I'll have what she's having.
When Harry Met Sally, or The Princess Bride.
Prepare to die.
Or Spinal Tap.
Very delicate.
Or from acting roles in All in the Family or Sleepless in Seattle.
That's what I'm trying to tell you, what women are looking for.
Because Reiner is so well known, when the trailer for God and Country dropped a few months ago, it lit up controversy.
I'm a Christian nationalist. I have nothing to be ashamed of.
Especially because of the appearance of evangelicals like CT's own Russell Moore in the film.
Patriotism, I think, is gratitude for being in a country as magnificent as this one.
It raised questions like, why would Christians take part in something like this? Especially with a filmmaker as overtly committed to left-wing and progressive causes as Reiner. But it also stirred curiosity. These people made a movie about us.
God wants America to be saved.
And if not us directly, our community, people we know, people we love, people we want the best for. So I saw the film.
Welcome to some of you who've traveled from other parts of the country to our nation's capital.
And we sat down for a conversation about why they made it, what they learned, and what they hope to accomplish with its release.
A.B. Mark, here we go.
All right, Dan Partland, Rob Reiner, welcome to the Bulletin. I'm super happy to have you with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Tell me, what made you want to make this film?
Well, I've been aware of the rise in power of this Christian nationalist movement. I, didn't call it that, didn't use that term, that phrase, back in the 80s, when Norman Lear started the People for the American Way. Mm-hmm. And we saw in the 70s, even when I was doing All in the Family, that when Roe v. Wade passed, all of a sudden you saw a movement that was afoot. And I didn't really think so much of it in terms of how powerful it could be or how effective. And I've seen it grow over the years. And as Dan points out, it really is completely divorced from what I understand Christianity to be and the teachings of Jesus. It seems completely divorced from it. Yeah. It seems like a political movement that uses an issue, whatever the issue is, to get what you want, and you're willing to do anything for it. You'll do it at the point of a gun. Yeah. You'll resort to violence in order to get it. And we've seen that thing grow over the years. And then when we saw what happened on January 6th, I thought, wow, they really, you can violently try to overthrow a government.
I think one of the elephants in the room for this conversation, and this is a critique I'm sure I know you all have already heard, is there are a lot of Christians who are looking at what's happening with the Republican Party, looking at this Christian nationalist movement and saying, yeah, we have our issues. So, forgive the term, but why should we listen to a couple of Hollywood liberals, right?
Right. Well, that's a perfect criticism. Yeah. And you shouldn't listen to a couple of Hollywood liberals. But what you should do is, when you watch the film, listen to the people who you respect and trust and have been devout Christians their whole lives, and some of them very conservative. Yeah. Listen to what they have to say. Don't listen to me. Particularly, they'll say to me, well, you're Jewish. Why would why should I care about what you think about Christianity? You're Jewish. And what I say, and this is the honest to God truth, is I was raised in a secular household. We were not religious. There was no religion in my house. But at a time in my life when I went through the worst, most difficult period of my life, And I was really in trouble and really searching for what do I believe? I mean, what can I hold on to? And I did a lot of reading during that period. I read, I read about Buddhism. I read about Islam. I read about Christianity. I even read up on Judaism. I read on all of these religions. And what I came away with, and this was a lot of soul searching, that dark period of the soul.
Yeah.
And I came away with looking at what Jesus taught, which was love thy neighbor and do unto others. And that resonated with me more than anything that I read. And if you look at other religions, it's essentially the same. I mean, all religions basically talk about loving your fellow man, peace, wanting to help your fellow man, all of those things resonated with me. And so that's where I come to on this. And then when I see, people ready to kill somebody over their belief, I said, that's not what Jesus taught.
Yeah, I entered into this content because I was concerned about what I saw going on in American democracy. That's where I come from. I didn't come, even though my dad was raised Catholic. I approached this as a secular person. But when you dig in deep, well, what you really want is to find the best voices, the best, most thoughtful perspectives. And what I was finding is some of the strongest, best voices were from Christians, and that gave a whole new dimension to the film because what I first saw as just democracy in crisis became very clear that also there's a crisis in the American church.
Yeah.
And I think it's become very tough for pastors.
Yeah.
Because, if you're teaching, if you're trying to teach what Jesus talked about and all that, and you're not being part of this, my way or the highway movement, then you get marginalized and diminished, and you're kind of overtaken by the flock. It's a very tough thing, I think, for pastors.
Well, there's really interesting data. So Barna has done research called the State of the Pastors, the survey, and they've shown really since COVID, just a staggering number of pastors who will essentially say, I would quit if I could right now. Because they're burned out on these issues.
That's so upsetting to hear that.
Well, and what they experience
really
is if these issues come up and they say, hey, let's talk about politics as an idol, politics as idolatry, and confront these things. It's not that the whole church is going to revolt, but it's that enough people are going to revolt to make your life miserable and make you want to quit because the attachment to these things is so deep and so profound.
Wow.
Most of the liberty that is unique to the American experiment is religious liberty. That's really what it was from the beginning.
Right.
And so freedom and pluralism are partners. You really can't have one without the other. You really can't have freedom if you don't have a pluralistic society, because in my family, which I gave you the examples of, we can't have the government. The government shouldn't have a role in endorsing and putting the force of law behind one system of beliefs than another.
Yeah.
Right? So that the way that was walled off in America was really so that religion would be safe, so that religion could flourish, and it has.
Yeah, so I had a funny experience watching the film because, I've grown up in the church my whole life and very devout family and all of this. And there were a lot of moments in this where what was on display is very far from my experience. I'm not connected to these sort of prophetic movements. I'm not connected to the Christian nationalist movement. But when you talk about the drift, right, there's a lot in it that is really familiar. And there's a lot in it in terms of like the way that it sort of calls back history, the way that it calls back the church that I grew up in the 80s and 90s and that sort of thing. Like that all made a lot of sense to me. I was laughing actually because I remembered there's a documentary called It Might Get Loud. It's Jimmy Page and Jack White and The Edge. They're sitting around and they make a Spinal Tap reference. Jimmy Page tells a story. He says when we went to see Spinal Tap, we're in the theater and everybody's laughing and we looked at each other and we all wept because we were like, this is us. This is what we look like, you know?
You want to hear a great story? There's just to piggyback on that. When I was casting The Princess Bride, the movie, Sting from The Police came in to audition as to possibly play my part. And he says to me, he says, you know, we watch it on the tour bus. We watch Spinal Tap. He says, I've seen that movie 50 times.
Yeah.
He says, every time I look at it, I don't know whether to laugh or cry.
Well, it's true. I mean, having been in bands that went nowhere, right? I can say, like, the experience of getting lost on the way to the stage, or like the revolving. Yes, very true to life. But there's an element of that feeling watching this film of going, like, that's not me, that's not my church, but it's my crazy uncle. You know, it's know what I mean? Like, not literally my crazy uncle, but it's my crazy uncle. Yeah. There's this feeling of, like, these are my people, and I my heart breaks for them to the extent that they're drawn into this stuff. So I'd love to just hear you talk a little bit about, like, talk to me about the what's the magnet? What's the attraction?
It's very complex and very different reasons for why somebody gets drawn into that. You know, there could be, you know, unhappiness with the government. There could be unhappiness with your life at a certain point. There could be anger at the way you see things developing, you know? I mean, there could be all kinds of issues, but you get drawn to it because you feel safe amongst, and you also need people to be able to preach that. You know, you need people to tell you this is a way to go. I mean, I look at, you know, somebody like Donald Trump, he becomes a galvanizing force behind all this because he's a strong man. And there's something about when you're feeling weak in your life, and we all have felt that, you want somebody to come in and be strong and fix it. I alone can fix it. Right. And you say, well, however I'm feeling depressed, I'm feeling disenfranchised, I'm feeling disconnected, whatever. And somebody comes along and says, I can fix this. You will, instead of doing the work, instead of showing your work and figuring out, you'll just say, okay, fix it. Do something for me right now. And I think that you'll find a lot of people are drawn into it because they think, okay, it's going to make everything make sense and it's going to all work for me.
We should be blazing forth as a countercultural example, and instead, we're leading the charge of malice and division.
Christian nationalism uses Christianity as a means to an end, that end being some form of authoritarianism.
You know, one of the things you talk about in the film is the role that fear plays behind this. People are afraid of losing something. They have a sense that there's they have a sense that they're persecuted, and I think that's a complicated issue because I think that there are narratives. I mean, again, it depends on where you live in the country. The average evangelical Christian living in Dallas, Texas, is not persecuted, right? But you know, we've heard there's the baker in Colorado who has said, look, I have a conscientious objection to this thing. I don't want to do it, and I'm going to get sued. You had the nuns who objected to the birth control mandate that was part of the Obamacare laws. They got sued. You know, nuns got sued by the federal government because they didn't want birth control, right? And so Christians look at that and they say, like, they feel very uncomfortable with that. And then I think the sensibility from a lot of them is those concerns get dismissed by the media. Those concerns get dismissed by leftist politicians. People say, well, you're not really persecuted. You're the powerful ones. You're not oppressed. You're the oppressor, et cetera. And they say, well, that doesn't make any sense. And a guy like Trump comes along and tells them exactly what they want to hear, and they sign up for that.
Right.
How do you think about that tension? Because from where I sit, I look at it and go, look, a pluralistic society, to me, says, look, if the nuns don't want birth control, don't make them buy birth control, right?
Yeah, no, and you're right about this because here's the thing. You know, you say the media is, you know, we've heard that liberal media bias and all that stuff, but you have Fox News, you have OAN, you have Newsmax, you have all kinds of venues for putting out information. And if it really goes against your belief not to sell a cake or do a wedding for a gay couple, or you're a nun who doesn't believe that you should have birth control, that's okay. You can lobby for that. You can use whatever means you have, whether it's through the media, whether it's through voting for somebody who believes that. You can do that. You just can't resort to violence to get that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You have to find a way to get those ideas across. And if the majority agrees with you, you'll get those ideas across.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it seems like there's really very few cases that we're actually talking about. They're interesting cases. They're complicated cases in some kinds of ways. I suspect that the bigger feeling of Christians losing, being persecuted is really that they're losing power, and in some senses they are. They're losing cultural power, and that pressure is coming from the secularization of the society.
Right.
It's not coming from the United States government trying to contain them or anybody trying to deny them their religious liberty. There are some theocrats, that are in the mix, and that's maybe confusing the discussion. But I think what you're really pointing to is what the mainstream conversation has gotten wrong about this space for a long time, is that they've seen it as religious extremism.
Mm-hmm.
It's not religious extremism. That's the point. It's political extremism.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a misread. George W. Bush was not a religious extremist, right?
Yeah.
There was nothing, his following was not. That wasn't what it was about.
Same with Romney.
Yeah, the mistaking of the political fervor because it's dressed in the language of faith is what creates that confusion. But it's definitely, that's why I think that speaks to what you're saying. Christians be like, well, I've been told that I'm pushing theocracy. I've been told that for 40 years, and I have no interest in theocracy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. What surprised you as you made the film?
The size and the scale of it. One of the things the film attempts to do is to really show the size and the scale of it, because we are all in media bubbles. And, I was aware of the moral majority and the rise of the Christian right as a political force in the 80s era. That's not what we're talking about. This thing is supercharged. It's huge. It's it's tens of millions of people at this point.
And incredibly well-funded.
Was there anything that surprised you in a good way, right? Because I think part of what's tragic about this is that evangelicals they're mobilized people. This is what they do, and there are aspects of evangelical history that are negative, and you get into some of these things in the film. But there are things like just 20 years ago, like the whole AIDS relief thing that happened with George W. Bush and Bono coming together, and really Bono says this as well. It was evangelicals who said this thing has to happen.
Well, we have a very positive. I mean, it's a rough look at the state of affairs now, but there's a very positive message at the end of the film, which delivered by Reverend Barber, where he talks about if we can get back to those real teachings of Jesus, what a great country this will be, and what a great world we'll have. But we have to get back to that and not, go off in this other direction.
This is going to sound ridiculous, but I would say, the Christian message is what surprised me. I honestly think that I too had begun to conflate the political deliverables of this movement with the faith. And so part of the work of digging into this was to really examine what the faith says, really look at what Christian teaching has been, really look at its impact on the world. And also for myself, because I've been asking this about all of these different events, is this Christian? In what way is this Christian? And what I found, just in the way this project has affected me as a person, is that I ask that of myself now too.
Well, last thing before we go, tell me what's the primary thing you hope people take away from this film who come to see it?
I hope they take away the teachings of Jesus, the real teachings of Jesus. That's what I hope they take away.
I just want people to reconnect with what I see as the real values on the two parallel tracks that the film looks at, of what the true values of American democracy are and what the true values of Christianity are, because I think that they work in concert. And the idea that there is friction or tension between those two is not true. And the U.S. doesn't need to be a Christian nation for those things to work. That the U.S. is inherently pluralistic, and that religious liberty is really America's sort of gift to the world.
Thank you both so much for being here with us. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate it. Good luck with the film.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Great.